to
I
Jammu
say
and
ancillary only for this reason, that it is a continuation of the process which began with the insertion of 370. In that sense, I am saying ancillary.
But
Otherwise,
it's constituent according to you because any power by which you can amend the constitution itself,
yes,
because it says that the president can, can determine which provisions of the constitution shall apply with exceptions and modifications.
modifications.
So the president is vested with the authority to apply or refashion the provisions of the constitution in relation to the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
That's right.
Consent, concurrence is a separate issue.
That's right.
Therefore, it partakes of a constituent power according to you.
That's right. So not only what the constitution of India will be in relation to Jammu and Kashmir, because on that depends what the constitutional ambit will be of the JK constitution. As the Lordships had pleased to observe, based on their own constitution of section 5, as this expand, that contracts. So therefore, this power is having a direct impact on the reduction of the scope and ambit, the play field for the JK constitution. So it's not only an unusual power, but a power which is of a very wide scope and wide impact, wide consequences, wide ramifications for the whole of the country.
Very significantly, any modification cannot be brought about by the legislature of J&K or under the Jammu and Kashmir constitution.
Right.
Modification has to be brought about within the rubric of the Indian constitution.
Indian constitution. That's right. And one of the proclamations, the first one of the Yuvraj Karan Singh, as he then was that this constitution of India will define the relationship between the state and the union. 25th November 1949. That's very important. I'm not reading it, you'll also have seen that. JK constitution was not there. So this constitution will define, that's a very potent expression, Malad.
It is.
So therefore, Malad, it's not an ordinary legislative power and I'm so sorry.
Two of the unit. Say if entry 82 of the union list is applied, the J&K, there's no provision in I just took 82 not for any reason. I picked up one entry.
Yes.
There is no provision in the J&K constitution by which they can say that, look, we don't want 82 hereafter.
Yes, right.
Because the application or non-application of provisions of the Indian constitution has to originate within the Indian constitution.
They are asking for anything is insufficient, inconclusive, of no avail. Of course, I'm not belittling it, but after all, one state and union relationship is involved. If a state is asking for something, of certainly the union should consider and give it a thought and possible accept. But that's a different dialogue. It's not talking and speaking to each other, as Mr. Gopal Subramanian was saying, and lot of talking and speaking and whispering also goes on in political sphere, in every law when it is made. Sometimes they meet outside in the lobbies and sort it out. Sometimes it goes to select committees and so on. So talking and speaking and whispering and all that is neither here nor there. That doesn't result in a compact. If two parties go outside and sort it out and then the bill is passed with some change or without changing. What happened when 370 was being tabled? Your Lordships has seen, there was hardly any discussion. Because the government said that do not debate too much because advantage will be taken by the warring state across the border. before UN. There was no debate. And in 1952, Mr. N.C. Chatterjee said that at that time you did not allow us to speak, saying that Pakistan will take advantage of it. But now in 52, then he put up questions. Of course, Nehruji answered it. These are only not critical of anything, but that one has to place oneself in those times, and it is difficult for us to go on a flashback in these cases. Difficult times. So he answered it then. But those questions were not put. So one can't put reliance on the speech of Mr. Anger or this or that speech of Mr. Sheikh Abdullah. They were divergent interest also, clashing interest also at that time in play. It doesn't detract from the stature of any of the political leaders. Sheikh Abdullah was a great personality, political leader. Nehruji was a great leader. Sardar Patel was a great leader. But what of that? Churchill was a very great leader. But after the Atlantic Charter was hashed out on the seas with President Roosevelt, when he was posed with the question, what about India? He said, this charter doesn't apply to the Indian. They are colonies. It is only meant for France and Poland, etc. in Europe, which lost freedom and their territory to Hitler. So they're all great leaders, but they grapple with their situation in the interest of their nation. And in this case, when 370 was being drafted, please bear this mind, my lords, these circumstances which were prevailing then. And one more very vital circumstance. We have been hearing, lords, and sometimes I've read through the Constituent Assembly debates also, many books also. They all said war is going on between India and Pakistan. What was that war, my lords? Somehow, my lord, we are still, the lips are pursed and we don't want to speak about the truth. Who was the Supreme Commander, my lord, of the Armed Forces? Auchinleck. All the three generals of India were British. All the three generals of Pakistan were British. What was this war, my lords? Churchill had, my lord, designed there itself that India has to be partitioned. Geopolitics. This war was a British war. They created it on both sides. The raiders came from where? Northwest Frontier Province. After 2 terms, Mr. Cunningham, who had been governor in Northwest Frontier Province, he was brought back in July, just before the elections, referendum. The raiders were trained, sent on trucks with weapons of army. Pakistan army had just been split from India. And the biggest, starkest example is, Lord, who was fighting Lords. What is this POK today? 2/3 of POK is Gilgit-Baltistan. And who fought the war there, Lords? Not the raiders. It was Major Brown, who was the regent there. He was posted again in July, just before that, by Cunningham. And this is a book, Lord, Mutiny. He killed all the forces of Maharaja. Ansar Ahmad was posted there, Lord, and he was arrested. And he, in 4 days, Lord, he hung the flag of Pakistan and he handed over to Cunningham. He sent some Mr. Alam from Pakistan army and he took over Gilgit-Baltistan. Where is the war with Pakistan? It is British. But if we close our eyes to all these, then it is the raiders fighting across the world. Raiders could not by themselves come up to Srinagar. The war had reached almost around this Kardu and Kargil and to that closeness to Tibet, Leh. So it was a war of a different kind, but nobody could say it because Mountbatten was there, Lord, as the Governor General. Again, must have the leaders, our leaders must maybe having some reason. That even though Lord Jinnah said, I will not accept any British Governor General, but the party said, no, we are ready to accept Governor, you continue with Indian Governor General. So what is this war? Governor General, and not only this, when the war began, Lord, they constituted a defense committee of the cabinet. And Mountbatten was made the chairman of that. So it's an excellent situation. Lord Mountbatten is the chairman of defense committee. Auchinleck is the supreme commander of forces. All generals are British, and one Britisher is mutinying, and when he returns to England, he is given the medal of the British Empire. So that's not the position of the war. So when you read the Constitution and 370, please bear in mind these things, Lord, in what circumstances our leaders were moving through. And when we were, Lord, about to push them back, Lord, and back and recover the territory, they deliberately stopped the war at a point of time and got the reference to the United Nations. Because if you had gone up to Mirpur and behind, then that connection would have been off with Gilgit-Baltistan. Now, these are hard facts, Lord. Nobody can dispute it. It is in these circumstances, Lord, and what was United Nations? The same very power which for geopolitical reasons the US and UK which wanted to partition India, they were the arbiters. Fortunately for us, Lord, Pakistan refused to vacate POK. So that resolution is dead. There's no need talking about United Nations, but at that time, look at the enormity of the situation in which 370 has been. We can't interpret it, therefore, Lord, with a tool of interpretative toolbox. Maxwell cannot answer this. Bennion cannot answer this. Grace cannot answer all this. None of the judgments so far which have been delivered in this court are helpful at all, Lord, to reach a conclusion, except Sampath Prakash, Lord, which dealt with to some extent with the situation after the expiry of the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly of Kashmir. That and that alone. The rest are all in different contexts, principles we can help, Lord, take help of. But this situation, if lost sight of, creates problems, Lord, at both ends. You accept their contention, then this becomes permanent. There is a proviso under 368, we can't amend it. Go by the route of 370, and 370 is permanent, and therefore, Lord, we are left at the mercy of the local vested interest, which does not always coincide with people's interest there. So you, therefore, look at the consequences of both sides. On one side, if you accept our submission, the right of the people of Jammu and Kashmir gets expanded. And they don't suffer blood. Right to property is a matter of the rich and the neo-rich blood. The poor people, they're hardly 19(1)(f), they're hardly concerned. But even those smaller people who have small houses, etc., so certainly it has meaning. But then 300A is there, which virtually subsumes, now it's a human right under the Constitution. So nothing is lost, not even 19(1)(f). Nobody can confiscate because of 300A. So 31 and may not be exactly at par with 31, but substantially it is there. So nothing is lost. They are put at par. The basic structure of federalism is protected. I don't know how well the submissions were made that federalism is affected, to keep it in mind. This is federalizing at par.
According to them, federalism is affected because you reduce the level of a state to a union territory.
Unless you accept asymmetry is basic structure, then they are affected. Asymmetry is never a basic structure. They are for special conditions. asymmetrical dealing with a state.
Mr. Dwivedi, this matter apart, the existence of a state is a very vital element in the federal.
I'm not on the state.
The
For my,
existence of a state, the continued existence of states is integral to federalism in India.
well, sir, I will humbly request your lordships, I'm dealing with CO 273. 272, which deals with 356, that has been answered by the Solicitor General, or whatever, your lordship will consider that. Supposing, my lords, for a moment, for my submission, please assume, my lord, that 272 and the act is not there. Because it's my case, what I am conversing for is, irrespective of 356 invocation and Article 3 invocation, 273 is sustainable on the anvil of 370 main part itself. It says that Parliament has recommended and we are passing this. Obtaining the recommendation of
consume tomorrow also if they're like.
so far as involvement of Parliament is concerned, it comes in two ways. One is
Mr. Dwivedi, just to sort of break your leg a bit, you spoke of there were 5 constituent powers.
the fifth one I have mentioned.
We got third. We have the original constituent power by which the constitution was
The
framed.
fourth.
Second was ancillary constituent power. The third was amendatory constituent power. That's the third.
The fourth, my lord, is like the provisions like Article 3 and 4, where amendment of schedules relating to states and their structure, etc., Article 3 and 4, they can be altered. And by a law of Parliament, and it is provided that they are not to be treated as amendment under Article 368.
Then can that be treated as a constituent power at all if it's not an amendment to the Constitution?
No, so they are amending the schedule to the Constitution. Their levels are different.
But the Constitution tells us that it's not really an amendatory power.
So therefore, I'm saying that these are the 5 different ways in which the power has been conferred. This is another way
All right.
where they say that you can make a change in the Constitution. Because my postulate is that every change in the Constitution itself, if brought about, is a constituent power.
All right. That's the fourth.
And the fifth is, my lords, Article 1C, where this court has held that if you acquire some other territory, then it says I'm sorry, Article 2, my lord.
Two, not
Two,
yeah.
two. I'm sorry, it's Article 2.
Parliament may by law.
Yes. Admit new states on such terms and conditions as things fit. Again, my lord. Very wide. So while admitting, my lord, A, B, or C country, let's say, my lord, some bordering city of China, my lord. They are very interested in naming our cities, my lord. If that is admitted, just aside, my lord, lighter way. So if it is admitted, my lord, then the terms and conditions can be fixed.
Therefore, your argument is that the exercise of the power under Article 370(3) is a constituent power exercised by the
So
President.
your lordship's judicial review has to be on that basis. And it's when your lordships expound 370, it has to be with that in mind, my lord.